Hello, welcome back to Factorio, and right before we get into the video, just wanted to say that I've traded peppermint mining for mining drones for my mental state, because as I say later on in this video, I'm mostly doing this for like the constraint of like building large factories, so I have to build small, less so the random ore challenge. I turned off biters since they suck to deal with on DangOREus, but I also pumped up resource richness to max to even that out. And I know normally having high resource richness is a good thing, but on DangOREus it basically just means you're not going anywhere, ever. So I figured it evened out. But anyway, with that, let's get into it. Loading into the world, it goes pretty much the same as normal. I do take note that there is a pretty decent oil patch in the starting area, but other than that, I just do the usual, placing burner miners and furnaces to start getting some initial resources. And I quickly realized that due to 2.0, I can't use the mining drones mod, because I need to research trains, because you can't craft iron sticks without the train research. So that's gonna be the first thing I'm sprinting towards. And as I get set up with the basics, I do think it's important to mention that I'm doing the DangOREus mod more so to limit my factory size, less so the nightmare resource management sushi belt garbage, hence my use of the mining drones instead of peppermint mining. Also, I will be going to win, not necessarily to get infinite research automated, as this is mostly a playthrough to get ready for SpaceAge. Anyway, back to the actual game. I set up burner miners wherever I can fit them, trying to keep them to only one resource for consistency, as I don't need them randomly toggling to coal for like 3 days straight. But with how the random ore is generated seemingly more often in chunks, this is a little easier than expected. For example, this coal chunk is mostly coal, so I can actually even get a couple miners feeding into each other, which last time I played DangOREus was not the case. With some basic resources, I craft my first power generation, just some boilers and steam engines. And spoiler alert, steam is probably the best power source in DangOREus unless you play deeper into infinite research, as there isn't room for solar, and getting uranium is very unlikely early on. I drag the power lines from the steam engines up to the top of the square, as I want to do the start of my base up there, as having it near the oil will make making a sort of bus a bit easier, as it can all start from the same area. As per usual, the first research is automation, because despite the fact that I'm probably going to be hand-feeding science for the foreseeable future, assembling machines will still make the process much faster and smoother overall. I make this little setup for red science with one assembler for gears and one for the science, accidentally blowing up one of the machines on an oil moat the first time around, but we won't worry about that. And there's also chests to hold the ingredients so I can hand-feed it easier. And then I queue up all the research to get to trains, because I'm pretty much beelining to that so I can use the mining drones, because using drills in DangOREus is just very annoying. After a while of babysitting the burner miners, I decided it would be worthwhile to make a few electric miners that would just deposit into chests, as while they will for sure end up mining multiple resources, which is annoying, they should run more consistently and quicker, and I don't have to keep running over here to deposit coal into them. I also make a bunch of furnaces that I can throw all that ore into, so that, I don't have to use filter inserters to do that automatically. Speaking of consistency, I do set up one more electric miner closer to where I have the rest of my stuff. And using the ability in 2.0 to add a filter on any inserter instead of having to have filter inserters, I make an inserter to take coal onto a belt to feed power, so I don't have to walk across the square every time it runs low on coal. And after about 40 minutes of game time, I have green research available, and I'm placing down a bunch more assemblers to deal with all the signs I'm gonna need to make. As to get to rails from here, I still need about 375 of each science. I place all the assemblers down in rows, just hand-feeding them materials directly as I make science, as this is substantially faster than any real automation I could make without the mining drones. I get the 375 red science pretty quick, but as expected, green science takes a while longer. But I do get it all and throw it into the labs within my first hour of game time, so all that's left to do is wait for the research to finish. I make more labs, to get up to a total of 20, just to make the research a bit faster, so I can get to the point of this game, you know, the whole factory thing? And after just 7 minutes, I have railway research, so let's get to the factory. I first move around, removing the mining drills I had down, and start collecting my iron to make a few mining depots, and a handful of mining drones to put in them. For those unfamiliar with mining drones, effectively it allows you to make these mining depot buildings and place mining drones in them that will walk over to their designated resource and collect it. Then you can extract the ore out of the depot like you would with any other container. I start off with a coal depot just to make sure my boiler doesn't run out of coal while I set this up, and then next I make an iron mine because iron is probably the most important resource, especially early game. I also set up my crappy red science setup again, as well as an equally questionable inserter assembler chain, mostly to make green science, I think. With that being said, I also add belts onto the system, but don't make automatic green science off of it. Maybe I was remembering to make starting supplies? If you hadn't noticed, I'm not quite fully starting automation yet, as I want to unlock the AAI Loaders first, as they will make getting the resources out of the depots a bit easier, just so I can not waste a ton of space covering them with inserters. So, back to the assembler spam to get green science. Also, I need to expand my power production around this time, and get up to 6 boilers to make me a bit safer from any future power issues. And after a bit more hand-feeding science in my assemblers, I get loaders, and now I can actually start the factory. I make a chemical plant to make lube. AAI Loaders adds a crap recipe to turn crude oil into lube, so I can add loaders to each of the mining depots, giving them a yellow belt worth of output speed for each loader. Though I will need some more drones to actually keep up with that once we get to the point where we're draining that much. I swiftly get to work blueprinting some furnace stacks under the mining depots, and while it might have been smarter to just make parts of the furnace stacks to start, I decide to make a full stack for iron, copper, and steel, as well as I guess a half stack for stone bricks. And of course, this takes a while, not only because of the size, but also because I did in fact not make starting supplies, and am handcrafting everything for these. That said, I do get the stacks up decently quick, all things considered. I start with iron, as it's what I need most of to craft the rest of the supplies for the other stacks, and then I just kinda go left to right, copper, steel, then stone. And by the end of hour 2, I have all the furnaces and all the underground belts placed. I finish setting up the copper stack pretty soon after, and it and the iron stack are both measured to have 1 yellow belt of output at most, which should hold me over for a good while. Next is steel, which despite having 96 furnaces as opposed to copper and iron's 48, will not have a yellow belt of output, but once again, for now that is still way more than enough. And stone bricks is just 24 furnaces, but that is also pretty generous, as stone and stone bricks are pretty much never used in science, except for purple science. And, with those built, just run the outputs parallel to each other and boom! Main bus established. A small, very small bus, but a bus regardless. After expanding the bus down, I can start working on proper science. First up, of course, is red science. I use the same structure as in my 1 science at a time series, 1 gear assembler and 10 red science assemblers. And, despite the simplicity of this setup, it can produce 60 red science per minute as long as it has resources. I placed 10 labs down, and now I have fully automated red science. And of course, up next is green science, which is only moderately more difficult. But with this still quite small setup, I have 60 green science per minute automated as well. And with how I set it up, the science assemblers are right next to each other, so the science is dispensed onto the same belt. And after a bit of watching the speed of the labs, I move the coal belt out of the way so I can add 10 more labs, getting back up to 20, just to make sure everything is running decently quickly. After that, and despite the fact that since I have biters turned off, it will be completely useless, here I am making military science anyway. It is a bit of a step up from green science in complexity, but not terribly. That said, my design is much more complicated than it probably had to be, but it is compact and works just fine. So now military science is done, and will promptly never be used. So instead, let's make an actually good science, blue science. This one's actually a bit more difficult, mostly due to its need of red circuits, and since I'm only putting the base materials on the bus, I have to make red circuits as part of the blue science build. I build blue science to fill the gap between black science and the labs. It is important to keep everything not only compact but close together, as I don't have a lot of space to work with, and every science is gonna get bigger and need more industry to produce than the one before it. Red circuits aren't too bad complexity-wise, but they are like almost 3 times as big as my red science build, so you know. But engines are easy, and with an oil patch near the starter square, it's easy to make the sulfur and plastic too. But I have now filled up almost half the square already. Though it also means I only have 2 more sciences to automate, so I guess I'm doing well? With those 3 sciences up, iron is falling a bit behind, so I make steel furnaces to replace the old stone ones, and change the yellow input belt to red, making the stack now able to produce a whole red belt of iron plates. Well, as long as the drones can keep pace with it. But the drones aren't the only thing I need to worry about keeping up, as the power production is also falling behind again. So I add 6 more boilers to the network, which should keep me from power death for at least a little while I get everything back up to speed. After watching the science go to make sure it's still working on pace, I extend the bus down, turning it along the side of the edge of my starter square. To get the bus across to the other side of the square, I do need a path over the lake, so I do go up to the mines to get a bunch of stones so I can landfill over it. As I'm extending the bus, I have to handcraft a lot of belts, so maybe I should finally make a mall. But of course, I can't make a rational mall, those take space and aren't as cursed, so cargo wagon mall it is. To those who watched the One Science at a Time series, the cargo wagon mall is very similar to the warehouse malls I made in that series. You will also be familiar with this design if you watched Doshington's Beltless run, which if you haven't watched that, you should, it's a good one. For those unfamiliar though, basically you can place 2 rails and with some convincing, put a cargo wagon on them. And since you can filter the inventory of a cargo wagon, you can have a bunch of inserters to just move items into adjacent assembling machines and then just shove everything right back into the cargo wagon. And since inserters can access anything in it, theoretically you can just make everything off of the cargo wagons. I don't want to take up too much space with my mall though, so I only make 3 lines. Mall line 1 is for belts, as handcrafting those got old 5 hours ago. Mall line 2 is for assembling machines and other common processing plants like oil refineries, chemical plants, and also for some reason labs. I do not need more labs. Then, third and final line is for inserters, as like belts I need a lot of them and would really rather not have to keep handcrafting them. Keeping them from getting jammed is a bit of a hassle, but since I don't have to worry about belts and they're very compact, these production lines are effectively perfect for the tight space I'm stuck in. With those done, I pull the bus over to the bottom left corner of the square and turn it again, so it's now headed up along the left side. And with them all done, I can now move on to the next science. Purple science. None of the ingredients of this science are particularly easy. 2 of them need red circuits, and the other is just needed in high quantity. This is a bit of a step up from blue science, but I've done it so many times now it should be fine. An added bonus of making purple science is that one of its ingredients is productivity modules, and I can run through and add these to previous builds so the materials don't get drained quite so fast. Pretty much everything is going to have productivity modules in it now, because I do not have room for more furnace stacks, and we are just drinking iron and copper. As per usual when I'm building these, I like to place all of the assembling machine first to get an idea of what the build will be like, and after getting them all down, I can run the belts, add inserters, and run power to get it running for real. Purple science is electric furnaces, which besides for the red circuits is pretty easy, and is also one of the only stonebook recipes for science. So, it is the only. No, it's not, because there's military science.
What kind of stupid are you?
Anyway, it's one of the only stone brick recipes for science, so it shouldn't have too much competition for that resource at least, especially since, as discussed before, we're not using military science. Ingredient 2 is productivity modules, and those are just green and red circuits mixed together, so while it is a lot of materials, it's not that complicated. And last is rails, which are easy, but you just need a lot of them to keep up. However, the main problem that will arise soon is that a lot of sciences are needing steel now, and since I don't even have a full yellow belt of output, it is not going to keep up once I get all the sciences done, but that is a problem for future me. Iron is also lacking, but that seems to be more of a mining speed issue at the moment. And, okay, everything is a little bit behind resource-wise except for stone, but it's working, so for now it's fine. With purple science routed to the labs, that's another science down. I add productivity modules to the red science first, and plan to just work down through the rest of them in order. And with iron being so behind, I do actually make another mining depot for it, especially since there's also gonna be more needed for steel, and hopefully now it'll keep up. I really hope so. Moving into hour 8 of the playthrough, it's mostly maintenance. Making more mining drones, applying productivity modules to old builds to reduce my material consumption. I upgrade the copper stack up to steel furnaces so it can actually produce a red belt of plates as well, as copper was not keeping up with needing to produce for 2 different sciences' red circuit demands. And while purple science is up, I have not yet upgraded oil, so I will quickly tear down the old oil area and advance to advanced oil processing. While it might seem a lot for a beginner, at least when I was a beginner it kinda did, it's basically just more oil per oil, as the 2 new oils can just be watered down in chemical plants to get the petroleum you're normally going to want. Also, I would like to say, being able to mirror the fluid inputs in 2.0 is one of my favorite quality of life changes they made, as it allows for much nicer designs for fluid-heavy builds. Also, another 6 boilers for the power grid as modules, while convenient, do make everything they are in take more power. Shortly into hour 9, I pretty quickly finish adding productivity modules to everything, blue science, the mall, and purple science. And, with all these modules, I'm once again worried about power, so despite the fact that I just upgraded it, I'm gonna make a big expansion, so I'm 100% safe going into the end of this playthrough. With that goal in mind, I add 22 boilers worth of power generation, more than doubling the power plant size. There's also a slight coal oopsie during this power expansion, but we can just leave it there. With power sorted now and forever, I can finally get to work on the final science I will be automating, yellow science. Yellow science is just objectively the worst to deal with, in my personal opinion. The ingredients being flying robot frames, which are the most complex science component besides for the satellite for space science, blue circuits that are just a ton of circuits, and some sulfuric acid as a treat, and the last ingredient is LDS, or low density structure, which while not being complicated just takes a ton of material. With all that in mind, cramming yellow science between purple and the oil refineries is a bit tight, but I do manage to make it work, even if it takes some very questionable placements and also a healthy dose of belt weaving. But with yellow science finished, I can now start researching the endgame science. But first, I fill it up with productivity modules to try and offset the extreme resource drain it has, at least a little bit. I also expand oil again, with the line of oil refineries just barely managing to stay within the bounds of the square. I also redo my cracking area because now that I need a bit of heavy oil, it would be smart to set it up in a way that I won't just eat all of the heavy and light oil, and with some very basic circuit controls to some pumps, it's easy to make sure I have some of each. With how awful steel is becoming, I upgrade it to steel furnaces, and that helps, but it's still not great. I would make it better, but I'm pretty much 100% out of room to put things, so it's kinda just gonna have to do. As I have said a couple times, I'm not automating rocket science, not only because I don't want to, but also because I just objectively do not have the room to do so. But I do want to make a rocket to win, so I decide that I can probably cram like one assembler for each rocket material above this bus on the bottom, and just wait for it to finish for a while. With this, it should make like one rocket part every 5 minutes or something like that, which in and of itself is kinda terrible, but I'm out of room. Kind of. But first things first, I need to run around and get materials for a rocket silo. Fortunately, most of the things I need for it are being made elsewhere, so it isn't too bad. The worst part is just making some temporary concrete assemblers, but that just takes time, so not all that bad. I place the silo at the end of the 11th hour, and with this setup, I can expect to finish in like 8.5 hours? That said, I am not waiting that long to win, because no. So instead of doing that, I begin walking to where materials are for the rocket are already being produced for science, specifically yellow science, to steal them, and to speed it up a bit. Yellow science uses 2 of 3 rocket materials, being blue circuit and low density structure, and the only other material I need for the rocket is rocket fuel, which I do make a little plant for under the lab, since it's the only thing I'm not already producing, and since it's just light oil, it's really easy. Besides for that, though, I also need to handcraft a satellite, and also make a cargo landing pad, as according to the internet, these are both required to actually win now. The satellite is annoying, especially since it needs stuff that I already needed for the rocket, but the landing pad is fine, just needed a bit of concrete again. But within about half an hour, the rocket is finished. Setting the satellite in its inventory, I launch it off, winning the game in just under 12 hours. Specifically, 11 hours, 51 minutes, and 34 seconds. Though, since I got 1,000 rocket science from that, I might as well just test my base of science a bit. So I queue up worker robot speed, useless for this world since I actually never got to using robots, but whatever. I get robot speed from 3 to 6, and it gets through the 1,900 science worth of research in just over an hour. Meaning, though this time, despite being built for 60 SPM, according to the production graph, I averaged about 25 science per minute through this research. With the way the base is, that's not particularly surprising since we're short on, like, everything, but it works well enough, I guess. Well, anyway, this was pretty much designed just to be a short video before I start work on a SpaceAge run, but I hope you liked it. And I will be seeing you then, and hopefully I get to use trains there, because I am very curious about the new train stuff and quality and such. So, I'll see you when I get to that, and farewell.